Good evening. It is an honor and a pleasure to be here with you. I very much appreciate the invitation to share some ideas about partnerships for the Indonesian context. I had the honor and pleasure to be in your glorious nation in 2004. I certainly didn't see all of it, but I gained enough cultural insight to know what a rich and diverse culture you have. And so know that I come to the topic at hand, partnerships for success in Indonesia, with considerable appreciation for the fact that diversity is a keynote characteristic of the Indonesian context. I want to talk about three kinds of partnerships. Obviously, one kind of partnership involves partnerships with schools. A second kind of partnership involves partnerships at the university level, involving schools, colleges, and departments of education. And the third kind of partnership is the partnership between schools and colleges of education and local school communities. Together, these three kinds of partnership systems offer wonderful opportunities to improve outcomes for Indonesian children, families, and communities, and also to make the work of educators and other helping professionals easier and better. The presentation that I've structured for you is set out in several parts. First, I want to re-emphasize the introductory comment about the importance of an Indonesian agenda, one that certainly takes stock of what's underway elsewhere in the world, but also builds on the strengths and unique opportunities while meeting the needs of Indonesians. The second is, part of the presentation will deal on the need for partnerships with the main question, why invest in them? The third, I've hinted at already, and that is, who are the partners and what value do they add? Then I'll give a few minutes to the idea of leadership for partnerships. That will be followed by some ideas about the strategies that successful partnership leaders design and implement. And then last but not least, a few comments on policy needs and requirements. If you now have a chance to look at the first slide, the emphasis is on achieving a very important balance. On the one hand, there is a fast-growing and rich international knowledge base about all that partnerships mean and entail. But on the other hand, there are manifest dangers and risks associated with borrowing models and strategies from other nations, which may not fit the uniqueness of the Indonesian context. And certainly, above all, we need to be careful of yet another round of colonialism, whereby strategies and models developed elsewhere in the world are brought blindly into the Indonesian context without due attention to the extent to which they fit. So, overall, by means of summary introduction, these partnerships in Indonesia, as elsewhere in the world, are basically strategic social experiments. They're results-oriented, and above all, they're tailor-made. And I use a three-component criteria to talk about these things, that partnerships are fit for purpose, in special contexts, and at particular times. In other words, a partnership that may work in Yogi may not work in Jakarta, and vice versa. A partnership that may work nicely in a rural community may not work especially well in an urban community. So a good part of the work of partnership design and implementation is figuring out what needs to be done in somewhat unique local contexts and with regard to particular needs, opportunities, and strengths, and ideally driven by assessment data, so that we're very strategic in how we plan these partnerships and in the resources that we use. Turning now to the need for partnerships, there are two slides that are involved here. The first comes from a well-known American school reform leader who offered a phrase that I now talk about all the time as well, and I recommend to you. He claimed that isolation is the enemy of improvement, which basically means that schools can't do it all alone, and adults shouldn't work alone, and children shouldn't learn alone, and teachers shouldn't work alone. And isolation is an enemy of improvement, particularly when there are three conditions that are present. One is poverty. The second is social exclusion, where people feel marginalized and oppressed and are victims of discrimination. And the third is social isolation. When you have all three, and you do in parts of Indonesia, as we have here in the United States, poverty, social exclusion, and social isolation, isolation is the enemy of improvement. The second need for partnership has to do with the fact that because poverty and social exclusion and social isolation are not good for children, and they're certainly not conducive to strong, healthy families, children then often come to school with multiple barriers to learning, success in school, and achievement. So partnerships are structured in part to specifically address those barriers to learning. A third purpose for partnerships, and also a need for same, is thinking about how partnerships serve parents. And with due recognition that families need to be supported and strong in order for children to come to school ready and able to learn. So partnerships that serve parents and families at the same time that they serve schools are an important priority, and certainly a different way in thinking about partnerships, particularly for educators, and more particularly for teachers, who all too often are accustomed to blaming parents for children's learning barriers, rather than thinking about ways in which they might be able to support and strengthen them. At the same time, social workers and other community development workers also need resources and assistance, and so partnerships are also in service of them. If you work in a community agency in most parts of the world, you are accustomed to having educators ask you to help them. But rarely do educators return the favor and say, here are the things that we can do to help you. So partnerships in service of community agencies, especially from educators and schools, are a very important thing. And then last but not least, our schools of education worldwide and our other professional schools, for example, our schools of public health, our schools of social work, and others, also are isolated from each other, and also are often separated from the most challenged schools. So the need for partnerships also extends to the university and our schools, colleges, and departments of education. Turning now to the second slide on the need for partnerships. Partnerships are most fundamentally needed and very practically needed when we have co-occurring and interlocking needs in kids and families. For example, child abuse and neglect, hunger, mental health problems, health-related needs. And under these circumstances, when you have multiple co-occurring needs, it is a practical necessity for educators, social workers, other kinds of community health providers, parents, and still others to work together, because none will be successful unless all are successful. Such is the nature of interdependent needs and problems structured by poverty, social exclusion, and social isolation. And so if you take only one thing away from the presentation, think about collaborative partnerships as being based on interdependent relationships, where no one agency, no one person is able to systematically achieve all of the desired outcomes that they want and need to achieve without the contributions of the others. In English language phraseology, there is a little slang phrase that applies to this idea about partnerships, and it's basically everybody wins. With a solid collaborative partnership, everybody benefits. And partnership goals, which tend to be shared goals, and shared resources follow from this idea. If you haven't established interdependent relationships, then you're not ready to go down the partnership road. So who are the important partners that need to be involved in these new kinds of configurations, particularly when poverty, social exclusion, and social isolation are evident in particular Indonesian communities? Obviously, schools are an important partner, and maybe the most important ones for purposes of this audience. And I think probably one of the most important things that you can learn from elsewhere in the world is that oftentimes these partnerships happen at just one school, when in fact they are needed at every school that serves the same children, families and communities. So one of the things that you can learn from our mistakes, particularly in the United States, is begin your planning with an idea of partnerships for schools at scale, where every school in a particular district is the target and also the beneficiary for the kinds of school, family, community, university partnerships that we're talking about. Of course, resources are always an issue, so are capacities, so I'm not suggesting that you can start at every school in the same vicinity and do it all at once, but I am suggesting that you begin with a grand design so that every school in a particular area is targeted for the kinds of partnerships that we know will improve results for children and families and also serve educators and other health professionals. The second, and probably right alongside the first important partner, are parents and families, and with a reminder that research around the world indicates a very important finding, and that is, despite their differences and even with long-standing periods of mistrust, that parents and teachers basically have the same goals for the children they serve. Mm-hmm. If you think about that for a moment, that's a very, very important finding that doubles as a way to start a partnership. We have the same goals for our children. Let's begin to think about how we can work together instead of engaging in the all too familiar game that is a worldwide game where parents and teachers blame each other, each claiming that the other is the problem, when in fact the problem is they don't work together. So parents and entire family systems are our second partner. Community agencies that serve children, parents, families, and even elders are a third partner. In our part of the world, grandparents are raising their children's children. And so the inclusion of elders is a very important part of the partnership framework. Local businesses and employers, broadly defined, need to be at the table, since one of the reasons that many children won't come to school, and even if they come, they won't stay, is that they don't believe that there'll be a job for them. So partnerships with employers are a very essential part of the work that lies ahead for us. I've talked before about the universities and colleges, particularly the education schools and training, technical training institutes. Other units, particularly social work and psychology and public health, need to be there. Government officials need to be there for a whole host of reasons, including the supports and resources that they can provide, because partnerships, especially in the startup phase, are expensive. And oftentimes there are political barriers that get in the way of their formation, and governmental leaders need to be part of the solution instead of being part of the problem. And last but not least, public policy specialists. Partnerships are not self-starting. You can't put them on a kind of automatic pilot and expect them to optimize and achieve the kinds of results that we want and need from them. They need leaders. And in addition to special leaders, we need to think about the structures that exist in schools and in agencies that provide leadership. So we have two things going on: the preparation of partnership leaders and then a function called leadership. At the school level, there is since partnerships involve bringing together different people and different organizations, partnerships by definition cross boundaries. They bring together once separate people and organizations for collective action in pursuit of common purposes. And so particularly at the school level, there are needs for someone, and in larger schools, several people who perform the role of what I like to call the school family community coordinator. They're boundary crossers. They work with families and community agencies, they work sometimes with universities, and above all they assist head teachers and school leaders with the important work of meeting several needs, solving several problems, sometimes in the community, sometimes in schools, sometimes in homes as a consequence of home visits to families. Although professionals often perform this role, and there are special training programs available for them, parents can also be prepared to do this work, and so can community leaders. And in fact, it provides a way to engage parents and community leaders when they are employed and trained as school family community coordinators. On the university side, particularly in schools, colleges, and departments of education, there are also boundary crossing faculty members who provide leadership, who help particularly education schools and local school communities to improve and learn and generate knowledge together. We know enough about university community and ed schools school partnerships to know that, that they absolutely depend upon boundary crossing faculty members who are as comfortable in the world of schools as they are in the university, and most of all are welcome in the worlds of schools as they are in the university, and who perform several roles involving research, professional development, student teaching, and principal internship supervision, and a host of other things. And then last but not least, in many communities, particularly when there are several schools involved with complex partnerships, there are local partnership councils or governance structures that consists of high-level school leaders, leaders from the School of Education and the university, leaders from community health and social services agencies, and leaders from governmental agencies. And the main idea is that the most powerful people in these several sectors need to be together in order to pool resources and to make sure that they're all working toward common purposes. And that doesn't happen by accident. Formal leadership structures are needed, and at the same time, these formal leadership structures provide opportunities for policy learning and improvement. What then do partnerships try to accomplish? What are some of the strategies that they employ? This is a very, very important topic. It requires several special lectures. So what I'll give you is just a very basic view that provides the beginnings of conversations that you all are able to have quite productively in local Indonesian school community contexts. The first is that it can be thought of as an outside-in strategy where schools are concerned. And the main idea of an outside-in strategy is that families and community leaders, governmental officials, and community health and social service providers are charged with addressing as many barriers, as many of the children's barriers to learning, healthy development, attendance, on-time arrival, and overall school success. Partnerships that are outside in work on then those things that are assumed to be barriers that stem from the environmental conditions for children. On the other side, which I would call inside out, educators begin to refashion their schools in accordance with what we know is needed for children who come from challenged backgrounds. And here we begin to think about reconfiguring schools and their organizations, thinking differently about classroom organization, different kinds of teaching learning mechanisms that ensure that children don't learn alone and adults don't have to try to teach them alone, and particularly things involving out-of-school time. What you end up with is sort of a two-sided improvement mantra for partnerships. On the one hand, all children come to school ready and able to learn. On the other hand, schools are ready for the learning, healthy development, and success of all children. And both sides of that improvement coin are absolutely needed when particularly poverty-challenged children are involved. And I should tell you that one of the big lessons learned from around the world is that too frequently educators and their schools, as well as their professors of education in the universities, assume that the problem is always with the families and the communities and the children, and not with their schools. So this second part, that it's not just about all children coming to school ready and able to learn, it's also about schools being ready for the learning and healthy development and academic success of all children, is absolutely critical. And here the growing knowledge base about differentiated, culturally responsive pedagogy, particularly those kinds of pedagogy and learning experiences that are appropriate for children who come from high-need families and communities, is a very important priority for not only the schools, but for education schools. And last but not least, in terms of these strategies, The main idea of having the universities involved, and particularly their faculty, is that we begin to think about what I like to call a two-way knowledge stream. On the one hand, university faculty and their pre-service education programs and in their research are trying to design research studies that yield actionable knowledge that might be called from the world of research to the world of practice. On the other hand, schools of education and their faculty are involved in local schools because so much of what they need to learn and know is in the practice. So the idea of a two-way knowledge street is not just the conventional one borrowed from the Northern Hemisphere, and particularly from the United States, of research to practice. It's also practice to research. And with the idea being that many of the innovations that hold the keys to successful knowledge, actionable knowledge, for helping us learn how to succeed with poverty-challenged kids and families will come from the world of practice. And that means that our research-oriented faculty and their research methodologies need to be practice and research-friendly. The final part of this is the idea that schools of education, universities overall, and partner schools and communities renew and improve together. The idea is sometimes called simultaneous renewal, and the main idea is as follows. If you prepare educators in the universities with entirely new ways of teaching and entirely new ways of organizing schools, and you don't ready schools for those new methods, then the chances are that when those new graduates go into schools, that real-world experience will wash out the effects of professional education. On the other hand, if you do wonderful things in schools and you don't change pre-service education programs in the universities, then everyone who gets hired into one of those new schools has to be retrained because their educational training was out of step with what was needed in those schools. So the idea is partnerships for simultaneous renewal, involving the universities and schools interacting and learning together and paving a two-way knowledge street, from research in the universities to practice in the schools, from practice in the schools back to the universities with ways to harvest that knowledge. In conclusion, if we're talking about building new kinds of schools and doing important and difficult policy work, bringing together now separate policies and policy leaders, and also beginning to think about all that needs to be in place for partnerships to be successful. We need to be clear on the fact that we're facing a long-term agenda. Institution building takes decades, not just 1 or 2 years. And one of the big policy lessons learned from this part of the world is that leaders expect too much too fast. And so we should be ready for the fact that, to use a sports metaphor, and I have a background in the sports studies field, that the work is like a marathon, it's not a sprint. And so we need to be careful not to try to do too much too fast and expect too much too fast, because so much of the work with partnerships involves building capacities and building people's new competencies. The second major lesson learned that I give you is that this needs to be seen as a build from strength agenda. So much of the work that is involved around the world at this point in time is characterized by a lot of finger pointing and blaming, where everyone else is the problem. I'm okay, but everyone else is not okay. And some of that is grounded in accountability discourse. Let us be clear on the idea that accountability is absolutely essential. Let's also think about how accountability can be a voluntary mechanism, not something that is forced on us from the outside, particularly with regard to partnerships. But in the same vein, this needs to be seen as a build from strength agenda. To return to the initial point I made, Indonesia has considerable uniqueness. It has unlimited potential inherent in the strength of its people and the core values that define it. And so being careful about policy goals and timetables is a very important part of the work that lies ahead. Third, and maybe most significantly, we have a pattern worldwide of blaming vulnerable people for the problems and needs and shortcomings that they manifest. We also have a problem that stems from the same pattern of blaming educators in schools when outcomes don't improve when they serve these kids and families. So it's time to move away from this long-standing pattern of blame and maltreatment and begin to move towards strength-based, solution-focused, and culturally competent language around the idea that we're all part of the solution or we're all part of the problem. And again, with the idea that this is going to take some time and that we need to know where we're going and what the progress markers are as part of all this. Partnership research and development specialists understand these things and they can help others begin to do it as well. All of this depends on a key idea that I perhaps danced over too quickly earlier, and that is that the best partnerships, which I call collaborative partnerships, are based on the idea that no one, but particularly educators in schools, will achieve the results they want and need if they continue to work alone. The whole idea of partnership then is to have people and agencies join forces in ways that allow them to bring their respective strengths and resources to bear on problems that often need to be solved at the same time because they nest in each other. And it extends to the universities and to governments and to public policy because so much of the work that all of us are doing now has not been represented the way it needs to be. So much of the work that we're doing now is part of a system. And if you understand systems thinking, and I know many of you do, you know that with any system, you start with two features. One is to be able to identify and map all relevant aspects of the system, and the other is, and this is the really important one, is the recognition that changes in one part of the system sooner or later will influence and be influenced by the others. And so that kind of systems thinking is a significant asset with the partnership, research, and development agenda that I've been sharing with you today. And it helps to explain why the universities absolutely have to be part of the solution. Because if they stay outside of the partnership mix, they'll remain part of the problem. Providing certainly valuable education and training to those who are privileged, but really missing so many of the problems of the day that require direct immersion via partnerships in school and community practice. And last but not least, to the extent that you are able to advance this partnership agenda, you'll build 21st century institutions for Indonesia that represent pathways toward prosperity. I was impressed in the time that I was in your nation. I've been even more impressed as I've read progress reports about all the spectacular things that you're doing. I've been especially impressed by the number of young people you've sent to the United States and elsewhere in the world for advanced training. And I know very well that those investments are going to pay dividends. They are the progress markers toward a research and development agenda that will make Indonesia an exemplar for the rest of the world. And I look forward to hearing about all of those achievements and being able to assist you in any way that I can. Best wishes as you continue the work ahead, and thank you for allowing me to share ideas with you.